Looks like I'm not going anywhere for a while. What a predicament.
What a predicament!
Hello, my name's Alex Bain, and welcome to my debut episode of What a Predicament, my first podcast episode. Thank you heaps, however you've managed to find this. Thanks heaps for listening and for tracking it down. Now, if you can't pick the accent, I'm from the South Island of New Zealand. It's not where I actually am right now. You are listening to possibly the first, but I couldn't make that promise, but at least one of the very few podcasts recorded in the Great White Southern Continent. And while I'm sure Australia would love to claim that title, I'm talking about Antarctica. Now, the weather, it turns out, can be quite volatile in this part of the world, and I've found myself somewhat snowed in, trapped inside until it calms down enough out there till I can get outside and leave this little hut. So the idea behind this podcast is, while I wait out my particular predicament, I'm going to use this time to scratch the surface of some of wider society's predicaments. Now, we're not really going to solve world hunger or any of the really big issues. I'm just going to give a token amount of investigation into some issues that interest me personally, and I think hopefully interest you, and just share my findings here. So while I wait for everything to settle down, allow me to dip my toe into the waters of the first predicament that I find ourselves plagued with. And this week, it's advertising. Why do ads, for the most part, suck? Is there even such a thing as a good ad? Now, I can think of a few. Some of these might be quite New Zealand-specific examples, but bear with me. You might know some from overseas, like the Bud Light radio ads, the world's most interesting man. In New Zealand, at least, there's the MasterCard All Blacks ads. We've got Vince Martin for Beauregard, Tui's Year Right campaign, the ASB Goldstein ads with the farmer, and then older ads like the Milky Bar Kid, the Crunchy Highway robbery and the song, the Dear John ads from the 80s. Some of those transcended being ads, and they became part of the culture. They were cultural memes. And so you can't really call them rubbish ads. And the ad world itself has employed some of the best creative visionaries on the planet. Successful and critically acclaimed film directors have all lent their talents to the world of commercials. People like Spike Jonze, Michael Mann, Wes Anderson, David Fincher, David Lynch, Ang Lee, Baz Luhrmann, Sofia Coppola, just to name a few. They've all dipped their toe into the world of advertising. Like, just look at any of Wes Anderson's ads, all on YouTube. He puts as much effort into an ad for a car as he would for one of his own short films. So why is it that those great bits of art, which, ignoring even just advertising, just as bits of content, they're as great as anything else, why are they the exception and not the rule? Why are 99% of ads boring? Is it that Mad Men has kind of got us all hoodwinked? Is it the fact that copywriters aren't these great geniuses? Are copywriters hacks? Well, I thought I'd get it straight from the horse's mouth. This particular horse is named Scott. Scott, do you suck?
Not always.
This is Scott Armstrong, a copywriter back in my home country of New Zealand. He's a New Zealand Radio Award winner for a series of commercials that he wrote, and has enjoyed a 22-year-long career in writing ads. So I figure here's the perfect person to talk to. Why is it, Scott, that ads suck?
I think bad ads basically all come down to the same thing, which is the target market has been disregarded. And that can mean either the target market hasn't been identified at all, or it can mean they have been identified, but they're being treated very poorly by the ad. And a good example of that is yelling in ads. I don't know if you remember Harvey Norman. Their TV ads used to be just an absolute assault on the senses when they came on. They were about as subtle as a kick to the face. And for a lot of people, that's what it felt like watching one. And people started to complain. They started to whinge and moan on social media. I seem to recall a Facebook group being made under the title, something along the lines of, "Stop Yelling at Me, Harvey Norman." And you know what? It worked. It took a while. It took probably a number of years. But you watch a Harvey Norman ad today, and it's noticeably calmer than the old ones, because they obviously took all this feedback on board and went, right, well, we can't do that anymore. But yeah, it's as a writer, you're always pushing to do the best by not only the client but the end user as well, the person who's hearing it or watching it. And while you do your very best, sometimes you are stymied by other factors. Often the client has their own idea about what they want to see or hear in the ad, and you can push back to a certain extent, but you reach a point where you really can't go any further with that, and you really just have to do what you're told because they're paying for the ads, basically. So it's to get a good ad to air is real teamwork, and not just on the creative side, but actually getting the client on board and everyone on the same page as well. Otherwise, you run into these sort of scenarios where you watch or hear an ad that's terrible, and you sort of know in the back of your mind that the client had something to do with it. They sort of push their own agenda to the point where the creatives were basically just doing what they were told.
So as a New Zealand radio award-winning copywriter, what is it that made your award-winning ads win an award? What makes a good ad? What was good about it that it deserved an award or could be thought of to be at that level?
Yeah, the one that I won the award for a couple of years ago was a campaign for a courier company in Greymouth. And the idea, the premise of it, was that these couriers would deliver anywhere on the West Coast. And that gave me something to work with. It's like, okay, this is something we can actually, develop and polish up. So the idea was they deliver anywhere on the West Coast. The execution, I created this grumpy hermit character who didn't like people. And all he wanted to do was be left alone in his own little world. And he kept getting interrupted by visitors, people finding him. And so his goal in life was to find the most remote, out-of-the-way place on the West Coast that he could possibly find so that no one could ever find him. And of course, in every ad, there's a knock on the door, or the doorbell goes off, and it's the bloke from Grey Valley Couriers going, I've got a parcel for you. So that was the execution of the idea. And, we never find out why people were sending him random parcels, who it was, what was in them. The damage was already done. He'd been interrupted. He'd been, what's the word?
Almost like violated.
He'd been found. And that was the absolute worst thing in his life. So every ad you'd find that he'd moved to another place. A real place, by the way. And after that first series of ads ran, the courier drivers started sort of suggesting these little out-of-the-way places that they knew of that we could use in the ads for the next lot. Then customers, people who lived on the West Coast, started ringing this courier company and saying, I bet you've never heard of blah, 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 such and such. And they write it down and go, thanks for that, we'll put that in the next ad. And off it went, and it sort of had a life of its own. But I remember that brief. I remember getting that brief. And it was such a basic brief. All it had on it was, they deliver anywhere on the West Coast. That was it. Client name, Grey Valley Couriers. Brief, they deliver anywhere on the West Coast. That was it. And I think it was the simplicity of that brief that led to the campaign that happened after it. Just a really good, simple premise that was, had tons of potential for creative execution.
What would have had to have happened throughout the process of coming up with that to turn your entertaining, award-winning ad into a piece of rubbish?
Yeah. Put the phone number in. Put some silly offer. If you heard this ad on the radio, tell us and we'll give you 10% off. There were a lot of things that could have gone wrong with it.
And that would have come from the client or
Yes.
the account manager?
Generally, it's the client. The account manager is sort of the person in between who goes, sells the airtime to the client, then sort of hooks the client up with the creative, and they sort of work it out themselves. And so generally when you've got something that has to be in the ad and someone's insisting, it's usually the client. And often it's just that they don't understand how a radio ad works, and they sort of see it as, like a fill a bag for $5 kind of scenario, like just stuff as much in there as you can, which is absolutely the worst thing you can do.
Like more words is extra value for, they've bought 30 seconds if I get 55 words instead of 50 words or 45 words.
Yeah, that's right. And, I think some clients expect listeners to sit there and wait for their ad to come on the radio with a pad and pen ready to go. So when it comes on and, they've got their cell phone number in it, the listener will be, oh, yep, writing it down. Oh, I'll give them a call now. That doesn't happen. The most important thing to do is to come up with one very simple message, like one line, a handful of words, and just work on reinforcing that. Once you get into the whole, we do this, we do that, we do this, we do that, we do this, you can ring us here, you can email us here, you can visit us here, you can do this, you can do that, it's a waste of time. Nobody can soak all that information in 30 seconds. So if you take, the one we were talking about before, for example, they deliver anywhere on the West Coast. We've spent years just reinforcing that one point. And that's what makes those ads work.
You've got the ears of the nation or the world, because this is online, or, realistically, probably the ears of me when I edit this and no one else. But is there anything you'd implore someone who wants to take out an ad? What do advertisers need to know, or what could be more effective for them and better for an audience as well?
Let me ask you a question, Alex. Personal question. How did you meet your girlfriend?
Funnily enough, flatmates. We were already living together, and it blossomed.
Wow.
We just had mutual friends and both needed a place at the same time, and she made it obvious that the option was there.
Wow, that's really nice.
So it's, the old adage wasn't proven true in this particular instance.
One more question. When you met her, did you yell at her?
No, not immediately.
Yeah. I think, that's the trick. Pro tip, nobody likes being yelled at, and particularly with advertising. Even if you were advertising even if you sort of got your target market down to military personnel, who are probably the most likely people to be yelled at, they still don't like it either. It's probably the one, if there was one thing that I could ask advertisers not to do, it's yell at their potentially new customers, because they don't like it.
The one time when yelling's been great, where it was very effective, was back of the wire. You hear that? It's like a teaser for a future episode. And like episode 3, you'll be like, oh, I get why he said that now. Now you're just like, what's back of the wire?
It was a good show. I enjoyed that. Yeah, you do have to respect your audience. I think for a lot of advertisers, they sort of sit there in their office and think, God, I've got to do something. I've got to make a big noise. I've got to make my ad noticed. And the way they go about it is just a real scattergun, make it loud, make it seem like a wild animal attack. Because
it's hard to ignore an animal attack.
That's right. Yeah, if a tiger came up to you right now and attacked you, it'd be hard to ignore that.
But you might not
you probably
give it your hard-earned money.
Well, you wouldn't necessarily enjoy it. You've got to seduce your customers. You've got to be on the right page, the same page as them. You've got to speak to them in a way that they would speak. You've got to tell them what they want to hear, rather than what you want to tell them.
Is there a place for just the basic 30-second ad in the future? You see people moving into different forms of marketing in terms of like sponsoring content and getting away from here's an ad, because it's easier now than ever to skip ads. We almost, whether it's TiVo or Netflix or anything, where you don't have to sit through an ad break anymore, or you're watching your programs online. Is there going to be a place for the humble ad in the future?
What a great question. Looking at my own TV habits, I hardly watch TV anymore because we've got Netflix and that's what we watch, because you don't have to watch ads, which is, terrible thing for a copywriter to say, because I'm quite fond of ads, but Ad avoidance is so easy now. I think that we'll probably see more things like product placements, branded content, which is basically your ad that's planted to look like an article or a program feature. So I think that that's probably in the pipeline. But then, at the end of the day, if you're selling sausages for $1 a kilo, you've still got to let people know about that somehow. And to that end, I can't see traditional advertising sort of disappearing anytime soon. But it's a really interesting question to ponder.
So this has set the stage for forms of marketing that are getting away from the traditional ad model of an ad break where whatever program you're watching stops and suddenly the ad break comes on and you realize you're watching commercials. There have long been an association with that sort of thing where the product that's being advertised and the show are more closely tied together. For instance, the name soap opera, as you may have heard, came from the strong association with the soap sponsors of those particular shows, the soap and detergent sponsors who were trying to reach the homemakers, the women at home during the day when those shows were broadcast, who were the ones they were trying to influence to buy these particular brands when they're in the supermarket doing their household shopping. Or in slightly more modern times, you'll see a web series like Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, which is a great watch. I really enjoy it. But it boils down to essentially being a commercial for each episode's featured car or car manufacturer, just masquerading as a Jerry Seinfeld vehicle. So it's something that's not quite an ad, but it's more than just product placement because the ad itself and the content, the program, are more... It's something in between, and it's something new.
Yes, advertisers are looking for different approaches.
This is David Bryce. He's a custom content consultant for New Zealand Media and Entertainment and a decorated veteran of terrestrial radio in New Zealand. So if anyone, he would know, David, do ads suck?
Hey, ads suck. Nobody likes them, but they're a fact of life. You've got to have some method for a business to communicate what they're doing.
Do you see advertisers that are looking to get away from the traditional ad model and try new things?
I think the thing to remember is that there are just so many different channels nowadays that advertisers have to get their message out everywhere with as much frequency as they can to try and cut through and be able to achieve the kind of results that they're looking for. Back in the day, you used to be able to put a few spots on the radio, buy a space in the local newspaper, and boom, job done. Now you've got multimedia considerations. There used to be the shared common experience where, for example, Lotto could spend a couple of $1 million, make a fantastic 60-second brand commercial. We would all see it clustered around our TVs on any night of the week, and job done. Now, you just can't rely on a single media to deliver that sense of community anymore. And the communities have fractured and split and changed and keep evolving so quickly that you have to change the way you're talking to these different communities to have even a chance of achieving the same sort of effectiveness as you had before. So it's how can they ingrain their story into other content that is taking place. The difficulty is you've always got legislation in the way, and you can't blur the lines too much between what's an ad and what's content. You have to be cognizant of that. But it's looking for ways to channel client information in an engaging way into other content. So it's a mix of interesting information with the advertiser's message. And then the other key aspect is really the experiential impact of an advertiser's message on the customer. That's increasingly the direction that I see things moving. The other side of the coin is there is still a place for the 30-second commercial. The old reach and frequency model. If you tell people often enough, hopefully they will change behaviour and go buy your sale goods or whatever. There's always been that truism about advertising. Only 50% of my advertising works. I just don't know which half.
So, why do ads suck? Well, they don't inherently. Like anything, it can be done respectfully. It's a seduction, not a forcible subway groping.
You can have an ad that on the surface is not particularly exciting, it's not particularly creative, it's not particularly funny, but the mechanics are in place. And if you take, for example, a butchery, if they've got sausages on sale this week for $1 a kilo, that's quite a compelling offer. And it's basically all you need to say is, this week, sausages $1 a kilo. To the listener, they go, oh, I like sausages, I know that's really cheap, and now I know where I can get them. So you don't have to be overly clever with offer-based advertising, and that's why most of it isn't, because the offer itself is so good that you don't need to try so hard to sell it. So there's basically two types of ads. There's the offer-based ad, and then there's the branding ad. So if you were doing a branding ad for the butchery, you wouldn't be talking about sausages for $1 a kilo. You'd be sort of digging a bit deeper and going, well, where do they get their meat from, and why is it better than that place down the road? And find out about, the guy who runs the place. Oh, he's a really funny bloke. You'll really like him. He's the funniest butcher in town. That's branding. That's sort of building on the brand itself. But when you've got specials like, sausages, it's pretty straightforward.
And hey, ads have brought us all sorts of great content over the years, from those 1930s soaps to your favourite web series, network television itself, and the radio. All made possible because of advertising. Because, who would ever put out a free program with no advertising that they, perhaps spent a whole weekend putting together just because they enjoyed making it or for the creative challenge, You'd have to be mad. This podcast is a What a Cat production. You can find all the episodes as they're released weekly at whatacat.co.nz or wherever you regularly find your favourite podcasts. If you find yourself in an advertising predicament and need copywriting or a sound guy who can create something cool that sounds, kind of like this podcast, then get in touch with me, Alex, at whatacatproductions@gmail.com. The opening theme music is a derivative of The Little Hotel of Horrors by Decamentarium, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0. Thanks to Tim Raby, Marissa Holder, David Gear, Scott Armstrong, David Bryce, Carolina Simpson, John Galliers for our cover art, and thanks to you for checking this out. And speaking of checking things out, oh, beautiful. Oh, man, feels good to be able to stretch the legs after being trapped in that hut for a while. No! Hello? Oh, geez, I seem to have fallen down a crevasse, and it looks like I might be here a while, which will give me just enough time to prepare another investigation into a different little predicament next week on the What a Predicament podcast.
That was a good show. I enjoyed that.